There is a land in the Middle East quite unlike any other. For centuries, our warrior people have attempted to defend it at all costs. It has been one of the most dangerous places in the world, and at times was host to some of the most dangerous people in the world. This is the place where terrorists go to school, where an ongoing jihad over a decade long is just the latest in a series of jihads that are over a decade long. We're talking about Waziristan. Now, some of you might not have heard of it, as it is just a small section of a formerly semi-autonomous region on the Afghan border. There are so many questions that a place like Waziristan stirs up. Who are the people defending the land? Why do extremists flock to it like a moth to a flame? And how has a line on a map drawn in the 19th century led to thousands of deaths, war, and suffering? Well, you're about to find out, because this is just about everything you need to know about Waziristan. Waziristan is an area around 11,585 square kilometers, or 4,500 square miles in size. It sits on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan in the northwest of Pakistan. This border is known as the Durand Line from back when the UK colonized India in the 19th century. The territory roughly lies between the Gomel River in the south and the Kurram River in the north. However, the entirety of Waziristan itself is also split in half administratively, creating what is known as South and North Waziristan. That's it. Although Waziristan was originally part of the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan, a semi-autonomous tribal region that existed from 1947 until 2018, it was merged with the neighboring province of Khyber, I'm going to butcher this, Pakhtunkhwa. Much like its western neighbor Afghanistan, Waziristan is particularly mountainous. Hills gradually rise from the east to the west until they reach staggering peaks over 3,000 meters, which is 9,000 feet in the southern half of the region. The northern half is less mountainous and more open, but it has large hills and vast valleys, perfect for guerrilla warfare. Having pretty hostile terrain is a double-edged sword in politics. The more rugged the landscape, the less likely you are to be successfully invaded. This is something that Afghanistan next door knows so well. However, that protection comes at a cost, and Waziristan's economic development is inhibited as a result. Open data Pakistan tells us that maize, fruit, and wheat are the major crops, with some sugar and rice to supplement that. However, recent patterns of erratic weather, droughts, and a lack of water infrastructure, or the capital to build, have resulted in an agricultural downturn in recent years. 90% of Waziristan's population are associated with the agricultural sector. In other words, the area of Waziristan as an area has always been one of little economic development. The people there live out a meager existence, and the agricultural downturn has only made the situation worse. They are at the whims of the weather like any substantial agricultural population. The Pakistan Bureau of Statistics states that there are just short of 1.6 million people living in Waziristan. The majority of the tribes living there are Pashtun, meaning they speak the Pashto language, similar to the similar to their Afghani neighbors, although they do speak a specific Waziri dialect. The most populous tribe is the Wazir, for which the area is known. There are also the Mashuds, Banis, and Dawars, among other smaller tribes as well. Pakistan is already a highly Islamic country, and Waziristan is no different. They adhere to Sunni Islam, and specifically the Hanafi school of thought, as well as Pashtwani, the traditional tribal code which facilitates their society. That is to say, as Muslims go, many Waziris are on the conservative side of things and follow a pretty strict code in accordance with their tribal culture, bolstered by Islam. Today's episode is brought to you by Airlo, the world's first and largest eSIM store. Whether you're traveling through Asia, the Middle East, or just want to avoid the nightmare of swapping physical SIM cards, Airlo has your back. With Airlo, you can instantly download a local or regional eSIM and connect to the internet the moment you land. No more hunting for airport kiosks or getting scammed on roaming fees. Just choose your country, install the eSIM, and you're online. It works with both iOS and Android, and you can even top up your data if you run out. They have plans starting as low as a couple of dollars. So whether you're Waziristan, wandering through the valleys of Afghanistan, Pakistan, or anywhere around the world, or just planning your next adventure, Airlo keeps you connected. So let's get back to it. However, while many will know Waziristan due to the lengthy war on terror and the coalition invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, The people who populate Waziristan have a long and sordid history with colonists. So let's go back a few centuries, shall we? To understand the history of Waziristan, you have to go back further than the history of Pakistan as a nation and delve into the history of India. India, at the time of British colonization in the 19th century, included the territories now known as the countries of Bangladesh and Pakistan. In 1806, Shah Abdul Aziz Pahlavi declared Dar al-Harb, meaning abode of war, on the British in India. He asserted in his fatwa that Muslims and then India should revolt against the British for freedom, equality, and justice. He also asserted that Muslims should be the de facto leaders of India after the British were expelled. As a result, Shah Abdul Aziz is seen as one of the earliest proponents of Indian independence. Even as far back as over 200 years ago, you can see Muslims in the subcontinent willing to fight to establish self-determination. This parallel from past to present shows that the surviving remnants of Islamic fundamentalism in Waziristan strongly link back to hundreds of years of history. It goes some way in explaining how this fundamentalism has defined the area for at least 2 centuries. 2 wars were fought between Britain and Afghanistan in the 19th century, owed to the geopolitical game of chess that the British Empire was playing against Russia to see who gained de jure control of Afghanistan. This geopolitical posturing continued until 1893, when Afghanistan's Abdur Rahman Khan and Britain's Sir Henry Mortimer Durrand agreed to delineate the border between what was then Afghanistan and British India. With a few strokes of a pen, the Durrand Line was born. Much like other British lines on maps at the time, it cut directly through local villages and divided communities, which would eventually lead to disaster years down the road. Who would have known? Waziristan just happened to be just on the British India side, with the border's existence separating Pashtun families living across the line to this day. When the British entered Waziristan, they halved it into its northern and southern parts, and set up administrative headquarters in Wana and Maranshah, where local command centers remain to this day. Even though the British are long gone, the British also introduced a land record system and revenue administration for the region. However, peace between Afghanistan and Britain simply couldn't last, and skirmishes over the border began almost immediately, with Britain not completely restoring order until 1901. The British time in Waziristan was immensely difficult, with different mountain tribes revolting against the British on a consistent basis until 1919, when the leader of Afghanistan was assassinated. Afghani troops then crossed the border into Waziristan, and thus the Third Anglo-Afghan War began. Along with their Muslim and Pashtun brothers in Afghanistan, the tribes also rose up in rebellion. The fighting was so brutal that the British required the use of enormous firepower to reassert control over the Plucky region by 1920, and eventually stationed a permanent garrison in Razmik in 1923. This move would prove to be something of a strategic blunder, as the garrison was an easy target for attacks. In the 1930s, there was more unrest and violence, as Mirza Ali Khan, a member of the Wazir tribe and also known under the title of the Fakir Butcher, declared jihad against the British. The tribesmen rallied around Khan and started a guerrilla war against British colonial troops, where many on both sides lost their lives. In the 1940s, violence was still common, but had reduced a lot in conjunction with Britain reducing the size of the garrison at Razmik. Khan would harass the British until they left British India in 1947. Khan, alongside his allies straddling the Durrand Line, declared the Banu Resolution. The resolution demanded that the Pashtuns be given a choice to have an independent state of Pashtunistan, composed of all Pashtun majority territories of British India. Instead, the Pashtuns were given the choice to join Pakistan during its process of becoming an independent nation, or India, which wasn't majority Muslim. Khan and his allies ultimately ignored this binary choice, and all of Waziristan, as well as all the other British India Pashtun territories, joined the newly formed nation of Pakistan, without an option to join Afghanistan or to create Pashtunistan. Khan refused to recognize Pakistan and launched a campaign against the new state, but it petered out by 1954 when his commander-in-chief, Alawar Khan Khatak, surrendered to Pakistani authorities. Khan himself died of natural causes in 1960, never being captured or killed. Pakistan was now a nation in a federally administered tribal area, including modern Waziristan, were established for the tribes to live semi-autonomously but under Pakistani rule. The Pakistanis kept much of the British administrative infrastructure, including keeping both North and South Waziristan's provincial capitals where they were. However, not everybody was happy with the arrangement. As we mentioned, the Fakir of P was one such actor who never approved of Pakistani rule. Despite Pakistan's foundation as a Muslim nation, Islamic fundamentalists living between Afghanistan and Waziristan have been trying to establish their own conservative brand of Islamic rule ever since. This displays the long-standing connection between Waziristan and Afghanistan, regardless of the Durand line dividing them. So when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in '79, hundreds of thousands of Afghanis crossed the border into Pakistan. This, in turn, caused a crisis within Pakistan, who were struggling to establish themselves on the world stage after fighting 2 wars with Big Brother India. Pakistan's border on the Afghanistan side was very poor, allowing many people through because of the hostile terrain, a theme that has continued into the modern day. The Pakistani government extended extensive support to the Afghan Mujahideen under President Zia-ul-Haq, which in turn allowed the United States to support Pakistan and the Mujahideen by proxy, because they were resisting Soviet conquest in Afghanistan. The Pakistanis, in conjunction with the U.S., used extremism to attempt to destabilize Soviet Afghanistan in what was known as Operation Cyclone. During this time, Waziristan acted as a safe haven for foreign Mujahideen from Central Asia. It was common during the Soviet-Afghan War for foreign Islamic fundamentalists to use the area as a launching pad for attacks into Afghanistan. This was likely due to a few factors: the establishment of Central Asian Mujahideen in the Fatah during the Soviet-Afghan War, the proximity of Afghanistan to Waziristan. The region being semi-autonomous meant that Islamabad did not have full control of the area and therefore had plausible deniability. As a result, Waziristan became something of a staging ground and a breeding ground for extremist Islamic ideas. The Taliban Pakistan, otherwise known as the Pakistani arm of the Taliban, would go on to be founded in Waziristan in 2002. Now we've gone through all that history at quite a pace there to show you the region of Waziristan is founded in fundamental Islamic rebellion and resistance against large powers. The people who live there make up a diverse group of warriors who are used to the harsh terrain and mountainous regions and are well versed in guerrilla warfare. They are staunchly supportive of their Pashtun brothers in Afghanistan and are willing to take up arms to defend their faith. So when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001, what did they think was going to happen? On September the 11th, 2001, 2 planes struck the World Trade Center towers in New York City, killing 3,000 people. The majority of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, but Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda were deemed to be the ultimate cause by U.S. government, as the hijackers were members of the terror organization. In the same year, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, beginning what became known as the War on Terror. In a cruel twist of fate, the Pakistani and U.S.-backed Islamic fundamentalists that fought the Soviets, including the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, had turned the jihad back on them. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. In 2004, the U.S. had pushed the fundamentalists into the mountains in the eastern side of the country while hunting al-Qaeda leaders in particular. The fighting was taking place in the Tora Bora Caves, also known as the Black Caves. This was during the final stages of the U.S.'s planned portion of the invasion. Of course, we all know that the U.S. went on to stay in Afghanistan for over 2 decades. During this time, the U.S. was also putting pressure on Pakistan to do something about the fundamentalists in their country, given the prevalence of extremists using Waziristan as a staging ground or a place to escape to. Under this pressure, in 2004, the Pakistani army entered the Khyber district just south of Waziristan for the first time since Pakistan's independence in 1947, later pushing into both southern and northern Waziristan itself. However, this presented a difficult situation for Pakistan. Many people in the tribal areas are Pashtun, so they are staunchly Islamic, and many of them disagreed with the U.S.'s invasion of Afghanistan. By extension, many more were unhappy with the Pakistani army entering their semi-autonomous territory in support of a U.S. initiative. They saw it as a stab in the back of the Pashtun brothers. Other areas in Pakistan had seen protests, also accusing the U.S. of imperialism and Pakistan of being its lackey. General Del Daley, the second-in-command during the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, stated in his memoir that, quote, "To make matters worse, this tribal area was sympathetic to bin Laden." Daley initially said this in relation to the Tora Bora and the attempted capture of bin Laden in 2001. Some Waziristanis would have inexplicably felt the same in 2004. that does not mean that Muslims in Waziristan agreed on everything. Large-scale fighting between the tribal populations and foreign militant groups would break out from time to time. For Waziristan, this would not be the end of militants in their land or the bloodshed that the region had become almost synonymous with. Fighting was bound to happen again. Waziristan was a powder keg, and all it needed was a spark. That spark came in July of 2007 in the city of Islamabad, over 300 kilometers away from Waziristan. What started out as clashes between militant student supporters and police at the Al Masjid Mosque led to it being seized by police and armed forces. Despite the Muslim League's attempt to quell the violence, it fell on deaf ears, with the siege lasting for 8 days, only being lifted to assault the mosque. Over 100 people were confirmed killed in the attack, but others have reported it as being a much higher death toll. Pakistan's Interior Secretary told reporters that, quote, "It is believed that some women and children holed up in the mosque lost their lives in the military operation against militants." However, no official numbers for the amount of innocent people killed were ever released. The siege of the Red Mosque, as it is known, sent the shallow truce of militants in Waziristan into a tailspin. Even during the 8-day siege itself, there were several attacks in Waziristan in retaliation. That's not all, though. This was something of a watershed moment for Pakistan. It represented the catalyst that would cause widespread violence in northwest Pakistan to once again break out. This move that killed innocent Muslims among militants in a mosque was simply the straw that broke the camel's back. And this formally put an end to any peace agreements between Pakistan and its fundamentalists. The Waziristan Accords were dead. It was open season. Under pressure, Pakistani President General Pervez Musharraf moved a large swath of the Pakistani army into Waziristan, totally abandoning all principles of their semi-autonomous governance in the name of law and order. Fierce clashes with militants began. There were so many attacks by militants in Waziristan that it would be impossible to cover them all in this video. One of the most famous attacks covered by the Long War Journal was an incident where the TTP successfully captured over 100 security forces personnel after intercepting a military convoy in August 2007. 300 people had been killed by attacks, mostly suicide bombings by October, between the tribal militants and their allies with the foreign militants. The Pakistani security forces entered the region, and with the occasional airstrike from the U.S., it was bedlam. However, the militants were able to take advantage of the chaos. In January of 2008, militants overran a Pakistani fort, one of many which scattered the landscape in Waziristan. Nevertheless, this goes to show you how much of a fighting force the militants were at this time. They were strong. They had numbers, weapons, connections, escape routes, logistics, and most importantly of all for them, faith. The TTP had almost total control of both North and South Waziristan by 2008. The Pakistani army, now under new management since President Musharraf's resignation in 2008, began the painstaking process of clearing, holding, and building on the bordering areas of Waziristan to regain control. The army used the staging time as preparation for a major military offensive into South Waziristan, which arrived in October of 2009. This was the first time since the conflict began that the Pakistani army truly had the numbers advantage over the smaller pockets of militants, as they sent 28,000 troops into South Waziristan from 3 different directions. The Pakistani army was able to take back several towns and installations within South Waziristan, including the fort they had lost a year prior. However, with an estimated 10,000 militants in Waziristan at the time, there were not many captured or killed. The Center for Defense Information also reported the potential reason for this, stating, quote, "Overall, there is little evidence that heavy fighting occurred during the entire operation because it appears that most militants fled in the face of the government advance. This reflects the guerrilla war tactics that the various militants in Pakistan used at the time. It's not out of the question that the militants, especially high-profile terrorists, would use the tunnel network in Waziristan to escape back into Afghanistan, where they could then stage counterattacks from. This is the true difficulty of fighting a stateless actor on the border of 2 states. There is always a place to run." Despite this, however, the Pakistani army had declared victory in South Waziristan by December of 2009. The fighting continued in other areas across western Pakistan, but South Waziristan went quiet for a considerable period, given the army's occupation there. In 2010, plans were drawn up for a full-fledged military invasion of North Waziristan. the last militant holdout. However, this wouldn't come to fruition until 4 years later in 2014. The Pakistani brass had to be patient. They had already taken back South Waziristan and would go on to hold it. Now it was time for the North. It couldn't have come at a worse time for the Pakistani Taliban, the biggest militant fighting force in Waziristan at the time. In 2014, the TTP collapsed into infighting, with one faction splitting completely away from the TTP, claiming the leadership's tactics were un-Islamic. Now, not only were the TTP weaker and less organized, but the Pakistani army was standing on their doorstep, waiting for an imminent invasion order. Tens of thousands of people had been killed in the 7 years since the TTP's rise to prominence. For this reason, the Pakistani army were not going to hold back, as they had been emboldened and battle-hardened, fighting against guerrilla militants on and off since at least 2004. On the 8th of June, the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan attacked the airport in Karachi with RPGs and gunfire, resulting in the deaths of 34 people. This was not the time to poke the hornet's nest, and the Pakistani army responded with a greater force. As a result of the attack on the airport, the operation was launched a week later on the 15th of July. Around 30,000 soldiers pushed into northern Waziristan to flush out the remaining militants, staging attacks and training soldiers there. The operation was, militarily speaking, a roaring success. Despite the deaths of 347 Pakistani soldiers, that proved to be the cost for killing over 2,700 militants, capturing over 18,000 weapons, and destroying over 800 hideouts in return. The number of total fatalities within the FATA declined from 2,863 in 2014 to just 1,862 in 2015. This is equivalent to a year-on-year casualty reduction of over 36%. However, there were other costs for this success. In terms of finances, it cost over $1.3 billion. Even for a successful operation, that's pretty damn expensive. If you wanted to extrapolate it out, Pakistan spent $470,000 per militant killed. There's also something to be said about the 500,000 people who were displaced by the conflict. Many people who lived in the area had no home to return to, owed to the damage that was caused by the fighting. Many who have tried to return home had no running water or electricity for at least 6 years. And then there's the question of whether the operation actually worked. Yeah, a reduction in violence in total terms is good. That is an unequivocal success. But one could argue that all this operation did was kick the can down the road. It treated the symptom, not the cause. It hadn't eradicated extremism in Waziristan or in Pakistan more widely. This is how the conflict was in Waziristan and across Pakistan up until recently. A low-intensity conflict where attacks continued and the Pakistani government continually failed to stamp extremism out of the region once and for all. Pakistan passed their 25th Amendment in May of 2018, officially federating FATA into the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region. This officially abolished semi-autonomy in the region and bestowed its inhabitants with the rights guaranteed by Pakistani citizenship. This was likely done to give the Pakistani government more say and influence over the region and allow them to keep a closer eye on it and the border with Afghanistan. And speaking of the border, a border fence between Pakistan and Afghanistan was built and mostly completed by 2021. In theory, this would stop those who wish to cross the border from one nation to another. Crucially, it would stop cross-border attack and retreat tactics by guerrilla militants, and those who staged attacks successfully would struggle to escape while being hunted by Pakistani forces. Now, in the simplest sense of walking across the land, that's true. However, as we well know by now, militants in this region don't tend to travel over ground, rather underground. It is highly unlikely that Pakistan is able to do anything about the extensive network of caves and tunnel systems that link Waziristan to Afghanistan, which means the border is by default semi-open. On September the 5th, 2020, a terrorist on a bomb-clad motorcycle targeted a Pakistani army convoy on the Mastung Road, killing 4 personnel and injuring 20 others. The Pakistani Taliban has since claimed responsibility for that attack, showing that the fence can only have so much of an effect when there are already extremists within your border. However, some effect is better than no effect. The number of cross-border attacks into Pakistan from Afghanistan fell from 82 in 2019 to just 11 in 2020. Although the COVID-19 pandemic could also have had some effect on this, defense has its drawbacks. It separates families from their relatives who live on the other side of the border. It also calls into question the border itself, which Afghanistan disputes owed to the Pashtun peoples in northwest Pakistan, and it could potentially be the reasoning behind a direct state conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan in the future. Finally, defense acts as a target for militants on the Afghan side of the border. Mortar shelling of a Pakistani border town in 2022 killed 17 people. In 2021, the fate of Waziristan once again changed directions for the worse, as the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan after 2 decades. Within months, the Taliban had taken back control of the country, and this posed a new challenge for Waziristan. Despite the fence and the operations to drive fundamentalist militants out of Pakistan, the Taliban no longer needed a staging ground in Pakistan, as all of Afghanistan was now their staging ground. Not only this, but the Taliban in Afghanistan were now armed with more resources and equipment than ever, considering the $7 billion worth of U.S. military hardware that was left behind. In 2023, U.S. arms were already finding their way into other conflicts, including Pakistan's ongoing 3-way Kashmir conflict alongside India and China. Therefore, Pakistan now has the Taliban more well-equipped than ever on its porous border, with no real way of totally stemming the infiltration of terrorists, guns, and radical ideals into their country. The Taliban's triumph in Afghanistan has re-galvanized the Pakistani Taliban, who now have a state-sized ally to support their operations, as well as a safe haven to stage attacks from. It's no surprise, then, that Pakistan's caretaker, Prime Minister Anwar al-Khattar, said the number of terrorist incidents in Pakistan had increased by 60% in November of 2023. There is simply only so much a fence can do. Waziristan today, in a way, is how it has always been, an unstable region balancing on a knife's edge, with many internal and external actors trying to influence it as it rebuilt itself. No matter who is in charge of the region, it appears to remain a place where fundamentalist Islamic ideologies are bred and trained. You only need to see the 2017 pictures posted by the BBC of defunct bomb factories in northern Waziristan to understand the entrenchment of these radical ideas in the region. Northern Waziristan specifically remains a target for attacks, such as when a girls' private school was blown up there on the 10th of May 2024. Fortunately, there were 0 casualties. The peril of the people who live near the Durand Line has spanned centuries. Generations of people have been blown up, shot, injured, radicalized, invaded, colonized, and displaced. It makes you wonder whether it would have been better for the Pashtun people to be given what they wanted back in 1947, a national homeland. The drawing and subsequent following of the Durand Line has led to misery, war, and jihad, so long spanning that it is self-affecting global geopolitics today. Could all that bloodshed have been avoided? Could more still be avoided? The cynical answer is, it's unlikely to change now. Despite Afghanistan's dispute over the border, the Durand Line is an internationally recognized border by most of the world. As a result, it is unlikely to change anytime soon, which means the Taliban-run Afghanistan will sustain an influence over the northwest of the country, and so attacks from the TTP will continue, bolstered by support from abroad. One thing is for sure, though, no matter what happens to the lands of Waziristan, the people who live there are warriors and survivors, and they will be ready. Thank you for watching.